Resume recording. एक second ना. Let me share my screen. Okay, that's fine. Cool. So we were studying OOP on Friday, and I also shared a few links with Lakshay to share it with you. So I hope you got it. एक second ना. Disable annotations. Let me share it once again. हाँ, ठीक है. Okay, so we were discussing OOP principles on our Friday lecture, and what we covered on that day was what is a class, what is an object, and then we had some discussion around what is a constructor. We also discussed miscellaneous points, that not miscellaneous points, very important points actually, that an object will have two aspects. One is its properties, its characteristics, and the other is its behavioral aspects, right? So characteristics are given by, or you can say the state is given by the variables or the attributes of the object, right? We discussed it that day. And what behavior a particular object is going to have, that is determined by the methods or functions that you have for the object. Okay, then we saw constructors. We discussed non-parameterized, or you can say default constructor, and we also discussed parameterized constructor. So I think this is all we discussed that day. Let me also go back to this doc for once. So we saw how to create an object, right? Class name, reference name is equal to new class name and then a round bracket. So this is the thing that I'm talking about. Human h1 is equal to new human, something like this, right? So this is just class name, and this is for calling the constructor. So what else did we see? I think mostly this is it, right? Object is the one that occupies space in your memory, so that's the actual entity that you are constructing. Class is just a blueprint. So I was just thinking about it before the class. So there is before the lecture, there is one more example. If you watched Shakalaka Boom Boom when you were a kid, right, he used to draw on the page, and then the object used to get out of it. So you can say, in a very, a very, you can say, basic sense, you can say that what he was drawing there was working as a class. He was just drawing a blueprint. When it actually came to life, that was the object which occupied some space, some you can say some space only, right, in a physical sense. So that was the actual object getting created out of it, right? So our class is different from that particular blueprint in a way that we code for it, and he was actually drawing the whole thing. So we are also painting a word picture only. Using words, using our code, we are describing how the particular entity is going to look like, right? What are the different parameters it will have? What are the different behaviors it will have? We discussed all this that day, right? Class, object, reference variables, access the variables using this dot, methods, constructors, right? So I think that is all we discussed that day, right? It was our first lecture, so we focused more on understanding than covering the concepts. So we will start with in continuation of that day, right? We will start in continuation of that day. So let's discuss one thing, or you can say one problem that I have in mind, okay, and which will give rise to a new concept. So we will learn something new based on that. Okay, so let's get started now. So there's one question that I'm asking you. The question is, I want you to count the number of objects made for a particular class. Okay, count the number of objects. This is short for number. Okay, of objects made for a particular class. Okay, so basically what I'm asking you is, if I have created student S1 is equal to new student, student S2 is equal to new student, all that I have done, how many students have I actually created? That is what I want you to tell me. That is what I want to figure out. Let me also open IntelliJ, right? Because that's where we will be coding. Okay, so this is my question to you, right? Let's see how we will tackle it. Let it, okay, IntelliJ is open. Student main function, I'm just uh, clearing it. Okay, so that we start from scratch. Then student class is there, you have these things. I am removing the methods also, not relevant for the discussion today. Just removing all this stuff. Okay, so now it only has the important things, right? You have the class with variables ID and name like we had that day, and I have three constructors pre-built: student with two variables, and student that is accepting only one parameter, that is the ID. Okay, theoretically speaking, you can also make a constructor which has one parameter that is only accepting the name, right? So you can, it's perfectly fine if you do it that way as well. So Java will understand which constructor you want to call based on what you are passing in the uh, passing during the object creation. Let me just demonstrate this point for you. Okay, so student s1 is equal to new student, right? If I'm not passing anything here, it means it's going to call the default constructor, right? Non-parameterized constructor. So let me write non-parameterized constructor, right? Similarly, if I do it like this, student s2 is equal to new student 1 comma, let's give a name, let me give the id 2, and let's give the name let me pick someone from you randomly, Anmol. Okay, so these are the two things that I am doing. So it will call the constructor which is accepting these two parameters. What are the two parameters? Integer and the string name. Okay, so which constructor is that? This one, right? So it's going to call the parameterized constructor with two parameters, or you can say two parameter constructor. Right, this is what it's going to do. And now I want to not confuse you, but ask you a little tricky question. Okay, will a constructor call be made in this scenario? Let me enable chat for you guys. Okay, will this particular statement, the line number 7, student s3 is equal to s2, will it lead to a constructor call? Very good. Some only one or two people are saying yes. You are unfortunately incorrect, but let me tell you why. Okay, screen is visible to you guys, right? Please refresh it once for those for whom it is not visible, है ना? चलो अच्छा zoom में let me just यार settings में जाके कहीं तो इसका size increase कर देते थे. I forgot how that was done. Appearance. Anyways, let me see if. Arey yaar, zoom I cannot do, and I forgot how to increase the font size here. Settings. Font. Now it's better, right? Now it's better. Okay. So for you who are saying that we will have to call a constructor here also, or we don't call constructor will be called in this scenario also. The answer is no. Constructor will not be called in this scenario. Constructor's job is to construct the object. Okay, so it has constructed the object here. When you are saying new student here, constructor is going to be called. New student, constructor is going to be called. Here you are just making a variable s3 and equating it to s2. That is the reference of an already existing object, right? So you are not creating a new object here, so no constructor call. Do you get it? No constructor call, because you are not creating a new object, right? As no new object is created. Right? So this part, let me just so because that day you guys were facing issues, as I was commenting and writing on the same thing. So today what I'll do is I'll just keep pasting the code here only, and after the class I will just format it like this in a good way, okay, so that we don't have cluttering in the same file, right? So this is first point, right? This is just a random point that I wanted to tell you, right? Because I just thought of it right now. Now let's get to the main problem. Okay, I was asking you, what can we do if we want to store the count? If we want to store the count of all the objects that have been created, right? So if I write this statement two times, student s1 is equal to new student, student s2 is equal to new student, what I mean is I have created two objects now, right? S1 is pointing to one object, s2 is pointing to another object, total two objects I have created, right? So in a very broad way, if I think about it, I want to do, I want to declare a count variable and increment it each time an object is being created. Something like this I want to do. How can I implement this thing? So what I want to tell you is, I want a count variable. Let's initialize it to 0. And what I want is, each time an object is being created, what will happen when an object is being created? Matlab, if I want to include it in my code, where in the code can I include it? That's my question. Declare a static with Anmol, you know it. You don't answer. In default constructor, or Rohit, basically in every constructor, right? Rohit, because see, creating an object like this, so basically if I write it again, student s1 is equal to new student, this is also an object. Now student s2 is equal to new student, id is I am passing as 2, this is also a student, right? So what if I only do count plus plus in the default constructor? Then it will only count objects which are getting created with the help of default constructor. It will not increment the count for this one, and that is a problem. We want the count to get incremented for each type of object creation, right? Because it doesn't matter which type of constructor you are using, object to object hai na? If a new object is being created, you want to do count plus plus for it, right? So do you all agree that we have to do, if we are taking a count variable, we have to increment that count variable in all the constructors? So if I explain the same thing in Hindi, okay, I'm not repeating anything, I'm not saying anything new, I'm just repeating. तो देखो क्या हो रहा है, अगर मैं इस कंस्ट्रक्टर को यूज कर रहा हूं, द डिफॉल्ट कंस्ट्रक्टर, सो my object creation line looks like this. This will make a call to the default constructor. So I agree, यहाँ पे तो मेरे को count plus plus करना ही चाहिए, but this is also an object creation only ना, ये भी एक object creation है. This will go to which constructor? It will go to this constructor. So अगर मैं count plus plus कर रहा हूं, तो मेरे को इधर पे भी करना चाहिए और इधर पे भी करना चाहिए, because all the three constructors, तीनों ही object creation पे call होंगे ना. बट इट ऑल डिपेंड्स ऑन हमने ऑब्जेक्ट किस तरीके से क्रिएट करा है. ऑब्जेक्ट क्रिएट करते समय कौन कौन से वेरिएबल्स पास किए हैं, on the basis of that your particular constructor will be called. So my point is, अगर हमें count plus plus करना है, we will do it in all the constructors ना. Is this point clear? Melvin, that's exactly what I am saying. That is what we will need to do. So you are correct only, right? Prince, can you quickly raise your hand? Prince Khan, can you quickly raise your hand? I will just unmute you quickly. Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Prince? Quickly, very fast.
Yes, sir.
हाँ, बोलो. What's your doubt?
Sir, I'm not able to get it. How would we increase the count in all the three constructors we have constructed?
देखो, when an object is being created,
Yes, sir.
either one of the constructor will be called. कोई भी एक call होगा,
Yes.
right?
Yes, sir.
So what do you want to do? ऐसा करना है क्या कि if this constructor is being used, do a count plus plus, but if this constructor is being used, do not do a count plus plus. This is not what we want to do, right? We want to do a count plus plus whenever an object is being created,
Yes, sir.
no matter which constructor it is using, right?
Yes, sir.
तो आप ऐसे मत कंफ्यूज हो कि हम लोग तीनों में कर देंगे तो एक ऑब्जेक्ट के लिए 3 काउंट इंक्रीमेंट होंगे. नो, फॉर वन ऑब्जेक्ट either one of this will be called na, koi bhi ek,
Okay, sir.
right? So that's why I'm doing it in all of these, so that no matter which constructor is getting utilized, count plus plus har baar hota hai, right?
Okay, sir.
So that's what I'm doing. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So this is my point, right? So this is the first thing. If I want to do a count plus plus, I will have to do inside each constructor, right? Because कोई partiality थोड़ी ना है, ये भी object create कर रहा है, ये भी object create कर रहा है. This is also creating an object only. So first thing is this. I will do a count plus plus. Sorry, this count plus plus here. Similarly, count plus plus here also, and similarly count plus plus here also. Now, for those who already know a little OOP, they might think that I am making a mistake, which I am, right? तुम लोग जो static पढ़ चुके हो, those guys might be thinking that I am making a mistake here. I am deliberately making it, so do not worry. Okay, we will come to it. So far, this structure looks fine. Okay, we have a count variable getting initialized with 0 as it should, and then we are incrementing the count plus plus each time. On a surface level, this looks good, right? Let's see what it has to say. Let's see if we are getting, let's see if we are getting our desired output or not. What should we get? The value of count should be equal to 2. But that is what we want. But let's see what's going to happen here. Okay, so s1 dot count, and let's see what we will get printed here, right? No, Shubh, in that case, basically it will not be, when you do a count plus plus outside that will not actually make a lot of sense, and I will tell you why. It will be clear to you. See, this is the output we are getting, which is when you do s1 dot count, you are getting 1 printed, but you expected 2 to be printed, and maybe you would be thinking ki s1 ke liye kiya hai, for s2 if we do, we will get some different answer. No, for s2 also if we do this, we are going to get a 1 only. So let me tell you what the problem here is. Okay, when I added this count variable inside my class, it is still a variable that's going to represent the state of object. Okay, so listen carefully, so understand carefully what's happening here. Earlier we had a structure like this. This is our object block. Just for representation I'm drawing it, right? There is nothing like this. So this is your integer ID. This is your string name. Something like this. This was the earlier structure. Now what are you having? Now you are having something like this. You have your ID, right? I'm just writing in short. You have your count variable, and then you have your name variable. This is what you have for each of the objects, right? Now look at the problem here. For each of the objects, let's say this is for S1, and let's say this is for S2. Name, ID, and you will also have count for this one as well, right? This is your S2. The problem is when you are creating S1, S2, and let's say you are creating S15, S29, S1000, the problem that you are seeing, or the problem that's happening here is, each time that you are creating an object, for that particular object, a count variable is there, which is initially 0. When you do a count plus plus, all that is happening is count variable of that particular object is getting incremented. So for each of these objects, the count is going to be what? From 0, it will get incremented to 1. Okay, this is what you are seeing in the current scenario. So this will get incremented to 1, this will get incremented to 1, and even if you keep on creating 30 objects, 40 objects, it's just going to remain 1 for all the objects. Do you understand this particular part? What happens if we do not use S1, S2 and simply print count? So in that case, what will happen is you will not be able to do it, no? I told you, if you want to access these variables, you can only do so with the help of an object, right? You cannot do it. But you are on the Some of you are on the correct track only, right? So what I'm saying is, just a second. So for each new object, the count variable is local to it, exactly specific to the particular object, and it will always stay one. Exactly, Akshay. That's what is happening, right? So what's happening is, I'm repeating it again for all of you. In the new structure, I have introduced a count variable as well. This count variable is also an object variable only. What is an object variable? A variable that stays at the object level, right? A variable that is used to represent the state of a particular object. That is our object variable. Yani ki all the variables that we have been studying on Friday's class, all of them, I did not say it, but all of them are just object variables, right? Specific to one particular object. Each object will have its own copy of all these variables. So what will happen in this case? You have a count variable. So what I'm saying is, if you make 30 objects, what will happen is, all those 30 objects are going to have a count variable of their own. That is, this is somewhere in the memory, this is somewhere else in the memory, and if you create a lot of objects also, let's say you create 5 objects, there are going to be 5 count variables, one for s1, one for s2, one for s3, one for s4, one for s5, right? So what you are doing is, for each object you are doing a plus plus, but that information is not useful to us because it is happening at an object level only. For each object you are doing a count plus plus, but that's not enough for us. That's not the correct thing to do here. So are you getting a sense, just answer this honestly, are you getting a sense that count variable, only this count variable, should be something that is shared by all the objects, and if I do a count plus plus, centrally at some location, that count should get incremented, right? So when I'm doing a count plus plus, after creation of S1, count should get incremented to 1. Then when I do a count plus plus, after creation of S2, it should get incremented on 1, not on 0. Then if I create the 5th object, count plus plus should give me 5. Something like this should happen. So instead of having a picture like this, where each object has its own copy of count variable, should we not have something like this? I create a count variable. How I do it is none of your business at this moment. Let's say if I do it somehow, I have one count variable like this. Okay, and what's happening is, the structure of your object is like this only. It has an ID, it has a name, right? And let's say you have multiple objects like this, right? So these are 4 objects in front of you, right? This is S1, sorry. This is S1, this is S2, this is S3, this is S4. What I want to do, how I will do it, I don't know. What I want to do is, after creation of S1, this count, which was initially 0, should get incremented to 1. Now when I'm creating S2, this particular count only should be accessed, and now when I increment it, it will not start getting incremented from 0. It will now get incremented from 1. So it will become 2. On creation of S3, it will become 3. On creation of S4, it will become 4. So I am not creating multiple copies of my count variables for count variable for each object. I am creating a shared copy. Only one particular you can say variable called count, which is shared by all these objects. Are you getting the sense of it? Like, do you agree that this is how we should do handle this particular problem? That's my question. है ना? Right? अरे करेंगे कोड यार, जितना पूछा उतना बोला करो. Okay, so those who are asking me to repeat, let me just quickly unmute Ashwin. Yeah, Ashwin, please unmute yourself fast. Just a second.
Hello.
Yeah, Ashwin.
सर मुझे लास्ट वाला पार्ट नहीं समझ में आया, वो सारे फंक्शन को कॉल करके काउंट वहां कैसे गैदर हो रहा है?
कैसे हो रहा है वो छोड़ो. डू यू आर यू गेटिंग दिस इंट्यूशन? आपको ऐसा सेंस आ रहा है क्या मन में कि काउंट की एक ही कॉपी होनी चाहिए? All these
यस सर।
other variables, ID, name, these are what? These are specific properties of object. For each object, this should be different, right? If I'm creating an object for you, the name should be Ashwin. If I'm creating an object for myself, the name should be Bhavya. But count variable is something that should be at the surface level, right? That should be at the class level instead of being at the object level. There should be only one copy that all of the objects can access. ऐसा कुछ मन में आ रहा है क्या आपको that this should be done? How it will be done? That is our headache for later. ये मैं पूछ रहा हूं, आपको सेंस समझ में आ रहा है इस बात का? I think he muted himself again. So anyways, so what I want you to understand is I want the same count variable to get incremented each time I am creating an object. So this count variable should only be one, and it should be declared at a class level. It's a class property rather than being an object property. Just think about it. Okay, plain English, all these ID, name, these variables should change according to the object, but this count variable, it should remain same because it should be declared at a class level because it's a property of the class rather than being a property of the object. Do you guys get this sense? है ना? So that's my only point. So let's get to something new. Let's get to how we can do it, and the how, like the answer to this how question is very easy. You create a variable at a class level that will only have one copy. Okay, so you create a variable at the class level, it will only have one copy, it will be shared by all the objects. So क्या होगा when you will create 4 objects? You will not have 4 copy of count variables. You will only have one count variable centrally maintained at the class level, and now when you are doing a count plus plus, this addition is getting added to that particular count variable. So now when you create 4 objects, you will actually see the number 4 reflected in the value of count variable. How can you achieve this? The answer is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is use a keyword called as static. STATIC. Static keyword is used to declare properties at a class level. Okay, so when I was not using static, these variables, these are all object variables. But as soon as you use the keyword static, it becomes, this particular variable becomes a class level variable. This particular variable only has one copy that is maintained at the class level. All your objects are going to share this particular property. Okay, so this count that you are having here now is not going to create multiple copies. This will be created when your class is being loaded into the memory. So remember when I said that when you create a class, no memory allocation takes place for these variables, because these variables only make sense when an actual object is there. कोई object होगा तभी तो उसकी ID और उसका name होगा, right? But this particular variable, it's a class level variable. It's a class level variable. So when you load your class into memory now, this particular variable will be declared or will be taking memory as soon as you are creating a class. It is not dependent on the creation of an object. Okay, as soon as you make your class, a count variable integer type ka, it will be created at the backend. It will be occupying memory. Okay, so that is what I mean by declaring the variable as static. This is declared at a class level. It's going to be shared by all the objects now. So there will be a shared copy, only one count variable that will be shared by all your objects. Okay, so what I mean to say is, no matter now, it doesn't matter whether you do s1.count or you do s2.count. Now what's happening is both these items are actually going to point to the same particular variable only. They are talking about the same variable only, because there is only one count in the student class, when you do s1.count, s2.count, or s3.count for that matter, it's going to come at the same copy only and take the value from there. So are you understanding it now? Pehle I had specific copy for each object. Now I have a common copy that is getting incremented in value. So if I run the same program now, okay, if I run the same program, what have I done? S1 is equal to new object creation. I've created two new objects. Then what is it that I'm doing here? Nothing. Three constructors are there. Each constructor is having a count plus plus inside it. Only change that I have done is static int count is equal to 0. Instead of saying int count, which would make it an object level property, I have used the word static here. That means it's only one variable at the class level and it's going to be shared by all your objects. So if I do the same thing now, what's going to happen is you are getting 2 here, and let me tell you what's happening in the background. Okay, so this count variable is there, right? When you do s1 is equal to new student, what's happening is you have this count variable at the class level. Count is equal to 0. There is no id, there is no name, nothing at this point, right? Only one variable is there which is declared at the class level. Other variables will make sense once an object is created. So when you create s1 is equal to new object, you have something like this. You have your id and you have your name. And because a constructor call will be made, count plus plus will happen. Count plus plus means there is only one copy, so this count will become 1 now. Similarly, when you create your s2, the second object, what will happen is id, name, whatever. So what will happen now? Again you will do count plus plus, but on which variable? Where is the count stored? Here. So now when you do count plus plus, it's happening on 1. So from 1, if you increase the count, it will give you 2. That's why you are getting the correct answer here. Is this part clear to you all? Public, forget about public, okay? Only focus on what I am asking. Don't go here and there. Is static and public static the same? Public does a different job, Ashwin, so don't get confused there. Just tell me that whether the significance of static keyword clear to you guys or not. Like, is the significance clear to you or not? So Tushar, there is no benefit as such of counting. It's just a, it's just one thing that we are doing. The point is, if you want to count, you will have to use a static variable, right? I just wanted to introduce static variables to you. That's why I just took this example. Okay, there is no special advantage of counting. Just a second. Can we create it outside class? So Mohit, the point is static variable is actually a variable at the class level, right? So it doesn't really make sense to make it outside the class. In fact, in Java, there is nothing that happens outside a class, right? See this? Do you see any piece of code that is written outside the class? No, you will never see it. Every code in Java is written inside a class only. This is main function, but this main function in itself is present inside this particular class, right? We are creating a student class. Inside that we are creating this particular variable. That's a class level variable, right? That's the only idea that you are supposed to get from here, right? Will s1.count give 1 after creating s2? So Nandan, very good question, right? Will s1.count give 1 after creation of s2? You guys answer. So see, what's happening is, Nandan, very good question actually. It's a valid question at this level. So whether you do s1.count, it's also going to go to this particular variable. Whether you do s2.count, it's also going to come to this particular variable. Only one variable is being maintained, right? All the objects are having access to that common variable. There are not multiple copies created for the same variable. So it doesn't matter whether you are doing s1.count or s2.count, you are going to have 2 only, right? Let me demonstrate it to you as well, s1.count, right? If I run this program, you are going to see 2 only, because it doesn't matter through which object you are going, you are actually ending up at the same variable only, right? And the good thing about static variable, or the unique thing about static variable is, see, what's the idea behind using the keyword static, I'm telling you again and again, this is a class level variable, right? So accessing it is not really dependent on creation of the object, right? So even if there is no object created, I can access this particular variable. How can I do it? I can also access a static variable like this, just by giving the class name and accessing that particular variable. You cannot do it for ID and name because your class does not have an ID or a name, but your class does have a count variable for itself. Okay, ID and name are object variables. You can access those variables only for objects. Okay, these things will become more and more clearer when you use these items in your day-to-day coding practices. But at a surface level, is this thing clear to you? What's happening here? Could you please, एक second here, खो गया message. Could you please dry run the code once? Okay, let me try that. I mean, that's what I've been doing actually, but yeah. What if you print s1.count before creation of s2? So Chirag, one will get printed, right? Static makes the element accessible in every constructor, right? Yeah, even if you don't use the static constructor में सब कुछ accessible है ही, right? No. You can't do it. Dream. Can we have non-static and static variable of same name? Let's try it. Very straightforward question, right? No, we cannot int count, right? So if I hover over here, variable count is already defined in this scope, right? इस class में आपने count variable define किया हुआ है, so you cannot do it. Okay, so it's working like that, right? So for those who want me to do a dry run, it's pretty straightforward what's happening here, right? I already did it. So what I said was count's copy is created as soon as you have a class. You have a count variable. Then what's happening is when you are creating the particular object, that particular count is getting incremented. From 0, it's getting incremented to 1. Then after creation of another object, you are doing count plus plus again. So then it's getting incremented from 1 to 2, right? So that is what's happening here. And I think we can move forward now, like from this particular point, because this seems pretty clear to me now, and we have already discussed it a lot of times. Why do we require this, and why do we count these? Why do we use static? Only tell me one thing. What is static? Is that clear to you? Why we use static keyword? This is in front of you, right? I took one example randomly that how can we count the number of objects. So because I wanted to introduce static variables to you, right? So static variables are declared at a class level. That is all I want you to understand at this point. Static variable only has one copy that can be accessed by all the objects. So it doesn't matter whether you do s1.count or s5.count, it's actually talking about the same variable, right? I think now is the time to disable chat. Yes. Okay. It means that we have a static variable inside class. It is connected to all objects. Yeah. It is accessible by all the objects. Explain the memory allocation. What I will explain to you is, I said that when you create a class, no memory allocation takes place, right? I said that for the object variables. But when you have a variable like this, declared as a static variable, this is a variable that is made with the intention to be used by the class. So when your class, this particular code is compiled, at that point only, memory is reserved for this particular thing. So memory allocation takes place during class creation, right? So for static variables, memory allocation takes place during class creation. For objects, for object variables, ID, name, all this stuff, memory allocation takes place when you create an actual object, right? So I think we have given enough time to it. If you are still unclear, all you need to understand is what is the use of what is the significance of a static variable. It's a variable that is declared at the class level and it can be shared by all the objects. That is all you need to understand, and let's move on from this because we have spent enough time on it. Okay, so the other thing that I want to discuss with you is there is another keyword called as the this keyword, right? This Just as we studied about the static keyword, there is this keyword. Okay, what is its job? What does it do? It refers to the current object. Okay, what do I mean by saying that it refers to the current object? You remember that day I made a function, I wrote a function like this, void code, and inside that I just had a print statement, name codes. So when S1 was calling it, let's say S1 का नाम भव्य है, and let's say S2's name is Anmol, right? So what was happening that day was, name codes mein, if S1 is calling this particular code function, Bhavya codes will be written. For S1, Bhavya codes will be written. Right? For S2, Anmol codes will be written. You guys remember this, right? This is what was happening that day. So what I mean by saying the current object is the object which has called the particular function, right? Or which has called the particular constructor. So जिस भी object को लेकर we are discussing the particular thing, that is the current object. Let me just clarify it further. Right? So let's say I did this. S1 is equal to new student. Right? What will happen? We will go inside this constructor. Right? So we are doing count plus plus. This is a static variable, but this thing we are doing id is equal to 1 and name is equal to default name. Who are we doing it for? We are doing it for S1 because that is the current object, right? So that is what I mean by saying current object. Okay, so now let me take a problem, explain that problem to you, and tell you how it can be solved using this keyword. Okay, so for now I'm just removing this particular constructor. It's just going to clutter us. We don't want it. Okay, 2 comma, let's give Bhavya here, right? Okay, so see what I'm doing here is, if you guys remember this, I have deliberately taken this variable name as SID. Okay, let me use the same variable name as the name of these object variables. Okay, let me do it. Okay, I'll tell you what I want to say here. Let me just rename it from SID to ID. Okay, sorry, and from S name to name. Okay, so what's happening here is, let me just try to explain the flow to you. So when you are creating this particular student, and let's only create this student, right? We don't need another student. So when I'm creating this particular student, what's happening is this 2 is getting passed to this particular variable ID. Okay, this is the local variable ID for this particular constructor. This name Bhavya is getting passed to this particular variable name. What I want is, I want S2's ID, or let me just write S1 only. Why confuse you guys? I want S1's ID to be equal to whatever ID I have received, and I want S1's name to be equal to whatever name I have received. Okay, this is what I want. Let's see what will happen. So let me allow chat for some time. Please only ask relevant questions. It wastes a lot of time if I have to go through the irrelevant ones. Okay, only ask what is relevant to the discussion that's going on in the class. Okay, if there is something that you have missed, we cannot cover it now. If there is something that you're asking in advance, don't ask it, because we are anyways going to come to that, right? So it just disturbs others. So I am going to enable chat again. So coming back to this thing, right? When I'm creating a student like this, what I want is, I want ID to get equated to the student's ID, S1's ID, and I want the name to get equated to student's name. Okay, this is what I want. So if I try to draw this thing for you, what I want is S1 is created, right? Because is equal to new student, like that. So now I have an ID here, and I have a variable name here, right? I have passed this 2 comma Bhavya, right? I have passed this 2 comma Bhavya. What I want is, I want the ID to be 2 and I want the name to be Bhavya. As simple as that. So what I'm doing in the constructor is I am receiving these variables int id and string name, right? And what I'm doing here is id is equal to id, name is equal to name. Okay, and I have also declared these variables outside. So in the class I have int id and string name, right? I have declared my object variables. This is what I am talking about. मैंने ये किया हुआ है ना? I have done this, right? Let us see what happens. So I'm just going to print the value of these variables s1.id, right? s1.name, s1 dot, sorry, I don't understand why it's giving two dots. s1.id, s1.name. Let's see what happens. What I expect it to what I expect it to do is id should get equal to 2, name should get equal to Bhavya. I should get 2 and Bhavya here. Let's see what we will get. Okay. Zero and null. Okay. 0 and null we are going to get, we are getting, but this is not what we expected, right? So let's see where the problem lies. Okay, this is the problem. This is the problem that I wanted you to understand and basically witness. And now we are going to firstly understand the problem and then work on the solution for the problem, right? So what we are having here is, sorry. So see, what we have here is a structure like this got generated, right? This structure got generated as soon as I did is equal to new student. I wanted 2 here and I wanted Bhavya here, but that is not what happened. These variables were untouched because you could see, right, 0 and null. What are these values? These are the default values that Java gives. Matlab, all our hard work, that these lines that we have written, these lines, they did not do anything at all. Let's try and understand what happened here. Okay, so what you wanted was, you have an ID, you have a name for each object, right? What you wanted was, you wanted something like this. Sorry, you wanted S1's ID to get equated to the ID that you have received, right? To get equated to this ID. You wanted S1's ID, so name, to get equated to this particular name that you have received from outside, right? So basically, you wanted to touch these variables for that particular object. Instead, what happened was, there is something called as a scope. Okay, there is something called as a scope. So in general, what's happening is the structure of our class is like this, right? So if I just create some space here, above this particular constructor, so this is your constructor only, right? This is your constructor. Above this, what you have is, you have int id and you have string name, right? These are what? These are your object variables. You wanted to touch these variables, right? You wanted to store your particular ID in this particular ID and the name that you have passed in this name. Because if it got changed here, then if you did access s1.id, s1.name, you would have gotten 2 and Bhavya, right? But here, instead, you are getting a null, a 0 and a null, right? That is something that I want you to understand what's happening there. See, what you want to do is, now I want a yes or no answer. You are receiving this ID from outside. You want this particular value to get stored here. You want this particular value to get stored here. You want something like this to happen, right? Are you getting clear with this idea? If you are not, feel free to say that. I will unmute you. You can explain the problem. I can explain it back to you so that others who are having the same doubt can also get it clarified. Hai na? This is what we want. Okay, ambiguity. Exactly, Anmol. Exactly. And it's not, Anmol, see, in this case, it's not ambiguity. I will tell you why. Java is clear about what it is doing. Okay. This is what you want. But what's happening is, if you look inside these curly braces, if you use the word ID here, Listen carefully. If you use the word ID here, it is not going to go outside this particular block, block to access any ID. What does Java do? It will try to find the nearest ID. So when you write ID here, this particular ID is being accessed. And what's happening then is it is getting equated to itself. So when you think that you are doing this particular ID is equal to ID that you have received from outside, all you are doing is this particular ID is getting equated to itself back. This particular name is getting equated to itself. So now do you realize that the object variables that you wanted to affect are actually untouched because you never reached them? Do you understand this part? This problem, do you understand? This dot id. हाँ वो तो ठीक है अरे Abdul, you know it, don't answer. Okay, I want to hear a no. Yeah, don't last 5 minutes can you repeat these kind of things? No, I mean I want a specific doubt. So Mahesh, Mahesh, please raise your hand. Maybe you can explain the your problem and I can explain it back, so other people are also clear with the thing. Similar to last time, make the ID and name also static. No, Akshay, that's going to basically destruct the whole purpose, right? I want the ID and name to be there at the object level, right? Yeah, Kunal, go ahead. Please be quick, okay? Guys, when I ask you, either don't raise hand, or if I ask you to unmute, please be quick to unmute yourselves. This is what wastes time. Anyways, so we have taken variable name same. They are in the class. How in the object? Shubh, if you are having this doubt, I can't answer it today. Okay, variables are going to be declared inside the class only, but they are going to be they are going to represent the property of the object, right? लिखोगे तो आप क्लास के अंदर ही ना, उससे तो ऑब्जेक्ट बनना है, right? What if we initialize the default name on class student? Don't see, this is the problem that I am getting, right? I'm asking you one thing, you're answering 10 different things. I only asked you one thing. I asked if the problem is clear to you, and I'm only getting few answers in that direction. Others are just saying something here and there. If the problem is clear to you, we can try and work on the solution. I do not want the solution, I know it. I do not want other problems. We can tackle that later. What I want you to maintain the flow of the class, what I want you to answer is, answer whatever I am asking, right? Is it clear, yes or no? If it's not clear, I will ask you to unmute. You are raising your hand, you are saying no, but you are not unmuting yourself. How am I supposed to solve your problem then? And all these things that I am saying now are just wasting our time, right? We have 2 hours to ourselves and these are getting wasted like this, right? Whatsoever be the object, but when we use the default constructor, this will point to object calling constructor. Yeah, Abhishek, that's what I'm saying, but I didn't use that particular thing as of now. So yeah. So this is the last unmute I am doing. After this, I will just keep with the flow of the class. So Smithul, yeah, please go ahead.
यस सर आप ये बोल रहे हो कि जो int id और string name हमने लिया है वो हम मेन क्लास से ले रहे हैं.
हाँ, वेरी गुड.
और जो उसके अंदर id इक्वल टू id और name इक्वल टू name है, वो जो id और name है वो int id जो ब्रैकेट में लिखा है
यही वाली
से आ रहा है, जो या फिर जो id और name का जो वो डिफॉल्ट वैल्यू लेता है वो वहां से लेता है.
नो सी व्हाट आई वांट इज, मैं चाहता हूं कि मेरे ऑब्जेक्ट के आईडी और ऑब्जेक्ट के नेम में ये वैल्यू स्टोर हो जाए, राइट? दिस इज व्हाट आई वांट समथिंग लाइक दिस. s1.id शुड बी id, s1.name शुड बी नेम, राइट? बट इंस्टेड व्हाट्स हैपनिंग इज व्हेन आई एम सेइंग id इज इक्वल टू id, this id supposed to be the ID of S1. So S1, it should be S1's ID. This is what I want. But actually, it is this particular ID only, which is getting passed from the constructor outside. So what's happening is, when I'm doing ID is equal to ID, all I'm actually getting here is, when I do this ID is equal to ID, what's happening is this particular ID is getting equated to itself back. So this particular variable is not touched in this particular case. How can we solve this problem? We can solve it by telling that this ID that I am saying, this ID, I want it to be the ID of object that I am referring to. Okay, so let me just tell you what I want to say here. So let me do it later. Okay, so this is something that I want to do. This dot ID, this dot name. So this is what I want to do. I want the current object's ID to get equated to what has been passed from outside. I want the current object's name to get equated to what has been passed from outside. For the past 20 minutes, what I have been trying to tell you is, I just wanted you to identify the problem. Okay, that this is what's happening. But if I do it like this, what I'm doing currently is, with this particular code in place, what's happening is ID was passed from outside. But when I do this dot ID, what does it mean? This dot ID accesses the ID variable of the current object. So both the variable names are same, but what it is referring to is different. So this ID, or you can say this particular ID, is the one that you have just passed, this particular one. This is the 2. But when I use this dot ID, what's happening is, when I use this dot ID, it's actually going to the object, accessing the ID variable for that object. So then it's coming here and accessing this particular variable. This particular variable I want to get equated to what I have sent from outside. So when I do this dot ID, what's happening is this particular ID is being accessed. That is what I wanted. So this particular ID is equal to the ID that I have just sent. So this is just the value, and this is the actual variable where I want to store it. Similarly, when I do this dot name, it's talking about the name of S1. It should get equated to what? The value that I have just sent from outside. So let me print this thing for you, system.out.println. First, I will just print ID and name. Sorry. Then I will print this dot ID Okay, then what I will do, let me do it like this, Control X. So once I am doing it before assignment, right, I am doing it before assignment. Right, before assignment ID is this, name is this, and once I will do it after assignment. What do I want? This dot ID, sorry, this dot name. Okay, this is what I want, right? So after assignment, this dot ID, this dot name. So let me tell you what will happen now. Earlier, by default, what is going to come in this dot ID, this dot name? These are empty fields as of now. I have not initialized any value there. So by default, they will give 0 and null here. After I have assigned the values correctly, what will happen is correct values will get printed now. Okay, so let's see if that happens or not. And judging by the pace that we are having here, I think what I can request Lakshay is, I can request him for a 3-hour session, especially when we are dealing with OOP. Okay, because this is something new and it is also something important, right? So maybe I can request Lakshay for the same. I will tell you what we are going to do for it, like well before tomorrow's lecture. So what I'm proposing is, maybe tomorrow and day after tomorrow we can have a 3-hour lecture instead of having a 2-hour lecture, and we can basically skip the homework discussion part. So I will ask Lakshay if that's possible. Okay, and we will convey you well before time. So don't worry about it. So I'm going to modify my question. Is there anyone to whom it is clear? The discussion that we just had. Okay, a lot of you are clear. Okay, fine, very good, very good. You can stop now. Now, is there anyone who has a doubt in this? That's more important, right? नो वाले मत आंसर करो, जिसको डाउट नहीं है दैट इज गुड, जिसको डाउट है वो लोग बताओ. सर, इज दिस इज रिप्लेस्ड विद द ऑब्जेक्ट नेम? राज, इट्स नॉट एक्चुअली रिप्लेस्ड विद द ऑब्जेक्ट नेम. दिस रेफर्स टू द करंट ऑब्जेक्ट, सो यू डोंट नीड टू रिप्लेस इट विद द ऑब्जेक्ट नेम, राइट? आपने दिस लिख दिया मतलब आप अभी करंट ऑब्जेक्ट की बात कर रहे हो, राइट? एग्जैक्टली प्रणय, दिस डॉट accesses the variables for the particular object, right? How did we get 0 and null before? So Vishal, by default Java gives these values to the variables, na? 0, null, false, all those values. So if we change the parameter name from id to sid as we did before, then we don't have this problem, right? Why do we not have this problem? Now let's get back to what we were doing earlier, right? So let me just remove it all together. Okay, let me sorry, write it here somewhere. Sorry, ठीक है ना? इसको I will format it later. So let's do what we were doing earlier. अरे यार student, this is what I was doing earlier. Why were we not having any problem here? Because अब जब आप इसको ID बोल रहे हो, what it will do? It will try to search for the ID ना in the class. Where will it go? It will come here. Do you understand the difference? Now, when you have changed the variable name to SID, when you are saying ID is equal to SID, what does it mean? It will try to go and search for ID in the current class, and what will it do? When it searches the ID, it will understand that okay, when I am only writing ID, it means I am talking about the ID of the current object. Okay, so like implicitly Java understands, right? ID is referring, ID means the ID of current object, right? Whereas SID is the value. SID, integer SID is the container that is catching the value that's coming from here, right? So here we did not have any ambiguity, here we did not have any confusion. That's why this was working. But internally how Java is reading it is, Java is still reading it like this. This dot id, that means the id variable of the current object should get equated to the value we are getting from outside. Okay, so when you do this dot id, it becomes clear to Java that okay, it's talking about the id variable of current object. And when you do this plain id, it is obviously the value that's coming from outside, right? So this is the use of this keyword. Okay, this is what is meant by this keyword, right? The keyword is used to eliminate the confusion. Yeah, every time we should use this for good practice. Exactly. Now that we know that there exists a this keyword, we will use it every time. Why is line 22 not printed in the previous code? Line 22 में क्या था यार? What was there in line 22? I don't remember. Okay, so this is what I wanted to tell you. The main crux of the story is this keyword is used to refer to the current object. Okay, that is the point of the whole story. Do you remember that function that we wrote in the previous class, void codes, and then we had simple name plus this thing, this function we had. You know how Java was interpreting it internally? When you say name codes, abhi Java is smart enough to understand, because it does not have any name inside this function. Where it will go? It will go outside the function and search inside the class for a function, for a variable named name, right? For a variable with the name, this particular name, right? Then it will understand, okay, I have a name variable here, which is the attribute, or you can say the variable for an object. What will it do then? It will try to resolve it saying this name is the name of the current object. So all these things that I am saying, how Java reads it internally is, this is how Java is reading it. When you wrote name codes, right, it was giving you the correct answer because this is how Java was reading it. Okay. Similarly, I told you how you can call one function within another function. So that also you can, when you do this, void fun. Okay. So just a simple statement. And then you call this codes function. This is possible, right? We did it in the previous class. How Java is reading it is this dot codes. Okay. Is it clear to you guys? If we take a constructor, so what is the use of a function which sets the value? We don't have a function that sets the value, right? Why to use constructor instead of directly initializing? So when we directly initialize, the code was getting longer, na? SID is equal to this, s1.id is equal to this, s1.name is equal to this. We had to do it for each of it. यहाँ पे simply pass कर दो ऐसे बस. So this one is easier or the previous one? This is easier, na? And if you are saying यहाँ पे initialize कर दो, तब तो every object will have the same ID, same name, right? Which object this dot represent for this dot code? Current object. Abhishek, the object that is called fun function. That is the current object, na? No, you don't need to worry about the internal differences. That's exactly what's happening. Dekho na, every object has this ID and name variable. Just by using constructor or anything else, all you are ensuring is you are ensuring that you are trying to reach a more systematic way of doing the same exact thing. Okay. So if I try to run it now, I have not called the function. Let me call the function. Then only it will be logical. So if I write fun, let's call fun function. Okay, I can call it on the s1 object. So if I call the fun function and run this particular thing, let's see what happens. See, to Bhavya, because I printed it like this. Where is it? Yeah, to Bhavya because of this print statement. Then I call the fun function. Inside fun, what is happening? Print inside fun got printed. This dot codes, yani ki call the codes function on this object. The object that has called the fun function. Who has called the fun function? S1. Yani ki S1 ke liye codes call karo. So what will you get there? This dot name. What does this mean? S1. S1 ka naam. Bhavya. Bhavya codes. We got this output. This function ended. This was the last line. This function ended. So we will go back. Nothing more to implement. This is the whole output. Right? Clear so far? Do we only need to use this keyword inside constructor? No, Diptendra, it's in front of you, no? See, we have used this keyword inside functions also. All this keyword means is it is used to refer to the current object. That is all. Whether you want to use it inside constructors, inside functions, inside anywhere, right? What will this do? This is going to refer to the current object. That's all. Okay. Line 22, this dot name is equal to, you can use it. My point was even if you don't use the keyword this, in this particular example there is no ambiguity. Because why? Because name, when you use the variable name, it is going to directly come to here. What does it mean? It's directly going to come to the object variable name. Because you have a different variable name here, s name, There is no confusion here. But as soon as you change it from S name to name, then it will get confused. What we are talking about, which name we are talking about, and it will actually not get confused. When you use name, then this is what I am saying. If you use the variable name and here you write name and do not use this dot name, what will happen is name will get equated to itself and our object variable name is going to remain untouched. So it will again have its default value that was null. Okay. See, IntelliJ is so smart, it's telling you, it's giving you a warning. Although this is not an error, but just to warn you, see, variable name is assigned to itself. Remove self assignment. कहाँ गया? अच्छा, oh, remove भी कर दिया उसने. I thought it will try to improve it. So if I okay, these things let's ignore. Let's ignore IntelliJ specific things. But the point is, this is how you can get rid of the problem, right? We should use this keyword for good practice. Let me just disable the chat for once. This dot id is for parent class. Udit, this is my problem with you guys. What is parent class? I don't know what is a parent class. We have not talked about the parent class. Okay. But I think, okay, I think I was sorry to lash out like this. I was wrong to lash out like this. Maybe you are talking about the current class. Okay. So this current class, student class, this dot id is for that particular class's object. Okay. We should use this for a good practice. Yes, you have really taken, I know, but just can't move forward when your peers are having doubt. Na? I don't want to complete the course and leave half of you hanging. That's not my intention. So that's why we will have to strike a balance. That's why I'm saying we will have to keep a longer class tomorrow if you want to complete syllabus. What if we use codes? Kalpesh, we did it in the last class. I'm not going to repeat it. You will get the same output. But all I am saying is, this is how Java reads it. Even if you write codes here, this is how Java reads this dot codes. Okay. So that's the output you are getting. That's more than enough time for this and static keyword. I'm not going to take any more questions on this. If you have a doubt, please try to explore the internet. And this is the precise reason, this is the exact reason why I shared links with you with the help of Lakshay to read. So I'm telling you here also, there's a website called as Beginner's Book. If you go here, go to Java, go to OOP, right? All these concepts that we have been talking about. What is an object? What is a class? Constructor in Java, OOP. Forget these things. Okay, so you can basically Google static beginner's book, and this is the first link. You can go to this. Why am I recommending beginner's book? It does not have unnecessary cluttering. It is only talking about to the point things, and you can study things from here. Okay, so this is why I ask you to study something before the class, because our pace in today's class has been pathetic. I can't move forward when you are not clear with it, and I don't like being stuck at the same position as well. So only one practical solution I can think of: please read before you come to the class, because this way we will never be able to complete anything, right? And I don't want to not take doubts as well. So please read before you come to the class. This is about the static keyword. There's the same thing about this keyword, right? Sorry, just Google it, right? There's a good resource for everything. Please read before the class, before you come to the class. Okay, so enough discussion on this keyword and the static keyword. These are, I prepared a summary of the things that I will discuss in the class. These are just the first 2 lines that we have discussed so far. There's a lot more I wanted to cover, and we have already taken more than 60% of the class, and we have not even covered 10% of the agenda. That's how slow we are moving. So please try to be focused. You getting doubts is not a problem. That's very natural. But there are 2 sincere requests. Do not ask unnecessary doubts. Okay, we are at level 1. You are asking level 5 questions. That's not going to make any sense, especially for the other people. That's first request, and that's non-negotiable. If you ask questions like that, I'm simply not going to answer. Second request is, please read before the class so that we can have a smooth flow instead of stopping at every possible point. Okay, so that's my request from you guys, just so we have better understanding and a good practical pace also, right? So we have covered the this keyword, we have covered static keyword, and I hope now the logic is clear to you guys. Okay, there is another concept called as constructor chaining, but I don't want to cover it today because that can put you in confusion. So let me take it tomorrow, and let's move on with the agenda, right? I have told you how we can tackle this particular problem, right? When you were having the name was same as the object variable, right? So you can use the this keyword to avoid that particular confusion and to get the desired answer, right? Other than that, I told you that and as well static methods. Okay, so just as you have static variables, you can have static methods also. Nothing fancy about it. Okay, so if I create a static void, the only point here is, see, when we were creating static functions, the functions that we created in previous class, the reason was, or the logic was, you have to create objects in order to call those functions, or only objects can call those functions, right? But when we have static functions, like this, that means you do not need to create any object to call this particular function, right? You can call this function with the help of your class name as well. Okay, so I'm just going to write a very straightforward line inside static function fun. Okay, that's all I'm going to write. And see, I'm not creating any object or anything, commenting this whole thing, right? All I'm doing is, this is how I'm going to call this particular function, student dot, and see, it's already giving me only the static options, student dot fun, student dot count, the variable, right? So if I do student dot fun here, what I will have is, see, this particular implementation student dot fun. So I'm going to get this particular output. Let's see if that happens or not. Let me remove this unnecessary part. Let me allow you the permission back to chat, right? So if I run this particular code, let's understand what's happening here, right? I have called student.fun function. Whenever you see that a particular method or variable has directly been accessed just by using the class name, this is your sign, or this is your you can say indicator to understand that you are talking about a particular static function, or you can say a static variable, right? So when you make a call like this, what you are sure about is there is a static function by the name of fun. Now when you go inside your class, you actually find a static function by the name of fun, and what is happening inside it? Nothing, just a simple print statement, right? Inside static function fun, and that just got printed, right? So that is all I wanted to tell you. How can you declare static functions? Just use the keyword static before your functions. आप लोग क्या करते थे? You used to write the return type, the name of the function, and then the parameter list inside it, and then you used to write the function body. All you need to do in order to make a function static is to add this particular static keyword in front of it. Is this part clear? Very straightforward, nothing fancy here. What happens if we remove static? When we did not add static, it was same as removing static, right? We have already done this, na? We have already done the discussion on functions without static, है ना? So इस case में this becomes a function that can only be called with the help of a object, right? But this function, this function, if I make it static, now this is not dependent on an object for its calling. You can call it at the class level also, right? Yeah. It's a good practice. Now that you know this and all these things, always use this when you want to refer to current objects variables. That gives us a better clarity of thought, right? Of what's happening. what if we write name in static function? Very good, Mohit. I'm going to come to it next. है ना? When do we declare a function as static? So Diptendu, we don't have a very good example of it in front of now, but theoretically speaking, we declare a function as static when we do not want to be dependent on an object creation for calling that particular function. For example, there are functions in a particular class that have nothing to do directly with the objects, right? So those functions you can declare as static, right? Difference between static variable and static function. Praveen, what is the difference between a variable and a function? That is the difference between a static variable and a static function, right? Can we do s1.fun when method is static? Yes, Chirag, definitely. आपने किया था ना, आपने s1.count भी किया था. So similarly, you can do this also, right? But the only point is that fun function has nothing object, has no object specific implementation, right? That's the only point. Now someone is asking this question. Who is asking? I think I forgot who asked, but someone asked this question. What if I want to use, I'm inside a static function. What if I want to use something like this.name, this.id? Can I do that? The answer is no. You cannot access object variables inside static function. Let me write it down. You cannot access non-static, or you can say object variables inside static function or static method. Similarly, on the similar lines, you cannot call non-static function inside static function. Why? That's the main question. Why can you not access object variables inside a static method, inside the scope of a static method? So the reason behind having a static method in the first place is being able to call this static method with the class name or without creating any object. But what do you want to do? You want to access an object variable inside a static method. But what if there is no object? Or basically, what I mean to say is static function's job is to be able to get called without there being any object for it. Right? तभी तो वो static है. It does not need any object for calling that particular function. But if you call this particular function and inside it you want to use some object variables, that doesn't make sense, na? कौन सा object? So my point is, when you call this function like this, student.fun, which object are you talking about? There is no object that I have created for this particular class as of now, right? Still, I will be calling this function. As you saw, I printed this particular line. But as soon as you do something like this, let's say this.name, see what's the error you are going to get. This cannot be referenced from a static context. Context matlab, I told you, right? The scope of the function. So this particular block inside this particular parenthesis has become a static scope block. Everything inside this should be compliant with that. As soon as you are doing this.name, it doesn't make any sense anymore, na? Static function hai, and you want to call a particular name from it. Whose name are we talking about? Which object are we talking about? Those are the kind of questions that you will get, and you don't have any answer for it. That's why you cannot access any particular object parameters from inside of a static function. Is this thing clear to you? I can give you the permission to chat once again. Is this point clear to you? है ना? ठीक है? So that's one thing. And now what is the other thing? For the same reason, You cannot call non-static function inside static function. Why? See, non-static function means a function that will be called with the object. A function that is being called from an object can have object variables, है ना? Let me demonstrate it for you. So if I have this function void codes and pretty straightforward implementation, name codes. See, you would think function call करने में क्या problem है? We are not accessing any particular variable of the object, right? Function is a function. We can call it inside this particular static block also. But the problem with this particular function call is आप codes पे आ गए. You did student.fun, right? This line I am removing because you know that it's an error. Now you came at codes. The problem is this particular function needs an object to call it. First problem, codes function needs to be called from an object. There is no object that's calling it, right? First problem. Second problem is, even if somehow, let's say hypothetically Java allows कि ठीक है भाई कर लो call, what is the next problem we are going to get? Name codes. कौन name? Whose name? Because you have not called the fun function with the help of an object, because it's a static function. When you come inside the codes function, the first question will be कौन नाम? What's name? Whose name are we talking about? So for that reason, you cannot call non-static functions from inside of static functions, because static function का simple सा मतलब है it can be called, or calling it is not dependent on objects, whereas other functions need objects to be there in order to get called. So that's why, see the error. Non-static method codes cannot be referenced from a static context. Okay, is the logic clear? Why we are not able to do so? ठीक है? So good then. From this point we can we can move on now, right? And the next thing that I want to tell you now is, so when we study OOP, these are the basic things, right? Object, classes, and this keyword, static keyword, all this stuff, right? What I want to tell you now is that there are certain concepts within OOP, right? Even inside OOP, this is just basic object-oriented programming that I told you. To explain it further, there are four concepts, mainly four concepts of OOP that we study about in great detail. Not great detail, but at least the basics. So we are now going to study about those four concepts. Not in today's class, obviously, but one by one we are going to take those concepts. Okay, so the first, or these are also called as four pillars of OOP. Okay, because these are very important four concepts of OOP, right? So four pillars of OOP, namely, first is inheritance, right? Second is polymorphism. There is no particular order, but like this is the order in which I explain because it's most intuitive, right? Third is abstraction, something that we are only going to touch upon in our syllabus, but we are going to use abundantly when we will write actual codes in our companies, right? Fourth is encapsulation. Again, same comment for abstraction and encapsulation. This is something that we are going to study in theory, and we're going to understand it properly so that when we read it from the internet, we are able to understand. But these two concepts are going to be the heart of your code when you will write actual codes inside your companies, right? But first, we are going to understand these two concepts. It's not that these are not important. मतलब ये तो very fundamental. This is the, you can say, fundamental most concept of OOP. So this to anyways we should understand. But for this I'm just giving you you can say an input from my side. We're going to study it theoretically, might not use it much, but when you will write your code in companies, this is something that you will be heavily reliant on. ठीक है, इसकी बहुत जरूरत पड़ेगी अपन को. So all these four pillars are pillars for a reason. You can't say कि if a table is there, you can't pull one leg out and say ki table would still be standing. Each leg of the table is equally important, right? So these are the four pillars: inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, and encapsulation. So we are today going to start with the concept of inheritance, and let's start with it then, right? There's nothing more to give a talk about it. Okay, so print function can be made. Okay, cool then. So let's talk about inheritance. Inheritance in Java or OOP is exactly similar to the inheritance that we, the English word inheritance that we know of, right? Inheritance, right? So how we know of inheritance, what is the meaning of the word inheritance? So when your parents are there, they have certain property, they have certain aspects. What they do is they inherit it to you, right? For example, if your father has a plot, if he has a flat, he will inherit it to you. That is one very you can say crude example. One more basic example is your father, your mother, they also inherit their traits to you, right? So you must have heard of something called as genes, right? It's a biological term, ज़्यादा मतलब तो मेरे को भी नहीं पता, but genes decide your characteristics. आप गोरे होगे, आप काले होगे, whether you will have what is the pattern of your facial hair going to be, will you hit baldness at an early age, right? All these stuff are basically governed by genes. Your voice, your teeth, your everything is, लोग बोलते हैं ना कि बिल्कुल मम्मी पे गया, बिल्कुल पापा पे गया, right? So some people's face looks similar to one of their parents. So these are all because of genes. So these are the biological properties we are inheriting from our parents, right? That is exactly what inheritance means in Java also, right? So you have a class, right? You have a particular class, and there will be another class, let's say class B. A is the parent of B. Let's say this is the kind of relationship. Just to give an analogy between Java and the real world, A is the parent of B. What does it mean? B is inheriting from A. Okay, B is inheriting from A. What does it mean in a more, you can say, if I try to explain it further, what does it mean? So A will have certain attributes, right? A will have certain characteristics. So you can say, let me just write attributes here, right? A will also have certain behavioral aspects, right? That is the function. When I say that B is inheriting from A, it means that all these attributes and methods, B is also going to have all of them. Okay, so when I say that these attributes, these methods are there inside class A, B is the child of class A, B is the child class of class A, it means that B is going to inherit all the attributes, all the characteristics of class A. Okay, let me give you an example for this thing, right? So let's say there is a class animal. There's a class animal, and I have a characteristic, let's say int number of legs, right? Number of legs is there, right? For dogs and cats and other animals it will be 4, for us it will be 2, right? Similarly you can have int number of hands. Similarly you can have int age. All the animals will have age, right? So this is just a particular example that I'm a very specific example, random example that I'm taking. My point is, all the animals will have these properties. Value will be different, right? For dog, the number of legs will be different, the number of hands will be different, age will be different for each dog. But point is, every animal is going to have that. And then you can have a function also, let's say very simplistic function I'm taking, void sound. Okay, so you can print inside it animal sound, right? So my point is, Animal is a standard class, is a base class that you have created. Now what you are going to do is you are going to create a dog class. Okay, you are going to create a dog class. Now your point is, because you have already declared these variables and this method inside your animal class, you do not need to repeat it again. Do you realize that benefit of inheritance? I told you, if B is inheriting from class A, it is going to take all the attributes and all the methods, and B is free to use all these particular objects, all these particular attributes and methods, right? So that means inside class B, you don't have to write these again. आपको B के अंदर फिर से ये variables और functions define करने की जरूरत नहीं है. It can use the copy that is created inside A. So can you visualize that it is increasing the code reusability? Is this part intuitively clear to you? We will take an example for this. We will see everything. But is this part clear to you? है ना? Clear है? So there's a principle in programming. I think Adarsh must have told you about it, and it's not necessary. It's called as DRY, dry. What it means is, don't repeat yourself. Right? And some people also say think twice, code once, something like that. So the idea behind all these statements is, and especially do not repeat yourself, it means for implementing the same functionality, you don't have to repeat yourself again and again, right? So if there is some functionality that you are reusing again and again, what we use for that, instead of writing that 10-line logic each and every time, we created something called as a function, right? We created a function, kept it safely with us, and whenever we wanted to repeat that logic again, all we did was we made a call to that function, asked it to solve our particular problem, and just use the output. Similarly, when we want to use inheritance, what we are ensuring is that we are not writing the same things again and again. We are just reusing stuff from here. Okay. So let me take a basic example from this one, right? Let me take a more, you can say, relatable example. Class human, right? Int age, string name, and function works. Okay, so let's say human works. Acha, how do you implement this thing? Like, how do you actually cause inheritance? So it is done like this. For example, if we want to create a class teacher that inherits the properties from class student, class human, what you will do is, this is the most important part, you will use the keyword extends. Okay, you will use the keyword extends. What does it mean? The class human is there and teacher is extending from the human class. That means teacher is an extension of humans only. Do you realize this? Teacher is a human only, but it's a special kind of human. So some more specific pointers will be there inside a teacher, but all the things that are there in the human, at least all of that will definitely be there. Okay, so this is how we use inheritance, and inside this, let's not declare anything. So this is also a valid implementation of inheritance. Before we move on and start coding, I just want to tell you the different kinds of inheritance there are, and then we can move on and try to code and see various examples of inheritance. Okay, so let's do this. First is your simple inheritance. Okay, your class A is there and your class B is there, and class B is inheriting from A, right? So this is your simple, it's called as the single inheritance. One class is inheriting from another class, single inheritance, right? Then this can also happen. Your class A is there, B is inheriting from A, and C is inheriting from B, right? So the names are pretty intuitive. Because there are multiple levels of inheritance, it's called as multi-level inheritance. right? Pretty straightforward. Then you have this also, and that you will see in this particular example, right? You have class A, you have class B, that is inheriting from class A. You have class C, that is also inheriting from class A only. This kind of inheritance, because a tree kind of structure is being made, family tree hoti na, and you know, a graph kind of thing is getting generated here. So what it's called as hierarchical. This is hierarchical inheritance. Okay, because the hierarchy is getting generated here, right? So this, in our example, we will see this, right? For example, if A is human, B can be teacher, C can be dancer. So both teacher and dancer are going to extend human class only. Do you realize that? So that's hierarchical inheritance, right? So that's also an example. Then the next thing that we are going to see is something that we do not study in Java, but still let me tell you, it's a kind of inheritance, so I'm just going to tell you. So class A, class B, and then we have this class C. What does this do? Same class is inheriting from two different classes. So this is called as multiple inheritance, and it's not allowed in Java. We will also see why it is not allowed, but for now this is multiple inheritance and it's not allowed in Java. Okay, and then what do we have next? If you mix more than one type of this thing, so it's called as hybrid inheritance. For example, if I mix hierarchical and multi-level, you can call it a hybrid kind of inheritance. So I'm not going to explain that. It's just that if you combine two or more than two of these kinds, it becomes a combined format or hybrid format, right? So that's one thing. Now let's get to the examples of inheritance. Okay, let me show you what I actually meant when I said that if there is a particular variable in the parent class, your child class will directly be able to use it. Okay, so let me show that part to you. Okay, also there is one more theoretical point that I wanted to tell you. The class which is at the base level, right, the first class on which you are basing your second class, is also called as the base class, right, or the parent class, because you know it's inheriting to the child class, something like that, or the super class. And the class that gets inherited these properties is called as the child class, or is also called as the subclass. Okay, let me see what messages you have put in the chat. Derived class, child class, whatever. Why does Java not support hierarchical inheritance? It does support it. I don't know who told you it doesn't support. Multiple it does not support. I will tell you why later. It's a type of inheritance. Mehran, the point is OOP is a concept, right? Java is not the only language implementing OOP, right? So other languages allow it. Using interface, I don't know what an interface is. How many types of inheritance? 4 5, these 4 5 types, right? Fifth is the hybrid one. If you can tell the base class and parent class difference ones. So Vivek, the class from which you are deriving is the base class. The class that is deriving the properties is the child class. We will see a code example, don't worry. Okay, cool then. Okay, so let me just comment this. Let me, yeah, I'm removing this student class. Okay, I know what happened, and I'm pasting it here so that although there is nothing new there, but still, so that we don't miss out on anything, I'm just pasting it here. Okay, this I'm removing. Let's create class animal or class human. That's an easy example. Int age, okay, and then we have class teacher, which extends human. Okay, see, this is empty. I'm not writing anything inside it, right? But what I want to show you is, because teacher has extended human, teacher will also have the age and name variable that human class has. Okay, so let me demonstrate that to you. So teacher T1 is equal to new teacher, right? And now what I want to tell you is just one thing. I just want to tell you that, see, there is no age or name variable inside teacher. So technically, if we do not know inheritance, अगर हमने inheritance नहीं पढ़ा होता, and we use something like this, t1.age, are you guys expecting an error? If there is no concept called as inheritance, तब तो लगता ना, because using teacher, using an object of teacher, I am accessing a variable that's not even there in teacher class. So अपन को लगता ना कि error है, but because of inheritance, you see there is no error here. Similarly, what do you have here? T1 dot name. Although it's only going to give you 0 and null values, my point is that you can access these variables. And see, another proof is if I just comment this line out, just look at the color of this variable. Gray color, because name is never used in the code. You have a field by the name of name, but it's never getting used. That's why it's gray. And when I'm writing this thing, it's getting changed to purple. Why? Because although I'm using teacher's reference to do it, but I'm talking about this name variable only. Because there is no name variable in my teacher class. Right? There's only name variable in the human class. So if I do it now, 0 and null, right? So the point is that teacher inherited the age and name variable. Okay, and let me also show you something more interesting. So let me have a function here, void fun, है ना, name So I'm writing this thing, name teaches. So this is going to be more interesting because I told you that it can access this variable. Now we are going to set a value for that and see what this function call does. Okay, so t1.age I'm not using anymore, but what I want to do is t1.name, I want to set it as Bhavya, है ना? And what I want to do now is I want to call this particular function on t1.fun. Okay, this line I don't need anymore. See what's happening. A teacher is getting created. Teacher's name is getting equated to Bhavya. Okay, this name variable we don't have in our teacher class, but we are getting it from the parent class. Okay, t1.fun. So I'm calling the fun. So it will go here in the teacher class. It will search for an implementation of fun function. Okay, because it found one, it is just going to implement it. So void fun. This dot name teaches. Ideally, we are expecting Bhavya teaches. Let's see if we get that or not. Okay. See. So do you see? I mean, I'm just giving you a proof that this name variable that we had in our human class is getting used here also. So it's getting inherited to the child class, right? So even when we don't have an age and name variable in the teacher class, its object is perfectly using it. Right? Also, we can have the same implementation. We can have the same implementation in the parent also. Right? So my point here is, see, you are creating an object for teacher, and on that object you are calling the function fun. But if you come to this class, there is no function by the name of fun. It is still not giving you any error, and if you will see this, it's going to give you the same output. So the point is, when you came here, what happened was name for teacher got assigned to Bhavya. Okay, because here you do not have a fun function and a fun function is being called, what will happen? It will go to the parent and what will it do? This dot name. How is it able to use it? Because name variable आया तो human से है ना. So that's why when you are doing this dot name teaches, it's working perfectly fine. And the main point that I wanted to tell you was functions also get inherited. right? Do you see? Or we can just write here fun function, because there is no fun function inside the child class that we have, right? So if I run it, sorry, if I run it, fun function inside the parent class, is this basic idea of recursion, inheritance clear to you guys? Let me just allow you to chat. Any doubt here? Because I mean, we can take it. We only have 6-7 more minutes. Can't start anything fresh. So if you have any doubt, you can just ask it. Okay. This part is clear, right? Very good. So if this part is clear, there is something more that we can take. I've told you types of inheritance. What more do I had? Yeah, this one point we can cover here. OOP is not different difficult, Anup. It's just that we have to keep our focus on what we are studying. Okay, at first it might seem different because we are studying it for the first time, right? But it's not difficult at all. I mean, OOP might be difficult, but we are just touching the surface. This should not be difficult. Okay, that's why I'm saying try to read it beforehand and do not focus on the questions that others are asking if they are not related to the concept of class, है ना? I mean lecture. Do we have to use this keyword in function? No, no, no. Sushmita, we did not use the this keyword and it was working perfectly fine. But because now we know the this keyword, like it's better to use it, right? Which constructor teacher class will call from human class? Very good. I'm going to come to it only. Come to that only. Human cannot access fun. No, human का ही तो है fun. Suman. हाँ. If there was a teacher, if there was a fun function inside teacher, then we would see क्या होता. That's a question for another time, right? Can we create new variable in child class? Arey, definitely, Varun. See, that's the point. Teacher is a human being, but teacher is a special human being. No, it is a human. That means it will have all the characteristics of a human being, plus it will have certain characteristics of its own also. So definitely teacher can, and in most cases the child class will have more definitive functions and attributes, because एक आपने outline draw कर दी कि ये एक इंसान है, this is a human being, but that human being is a teacher, so that will have more specific properties to it, right? sorry. So if we initialize a variable both in parent and child class and print the variable by creating an object, what will it print? Very good question, Vibhuti. I would encourage you to do it yourself in this particular scenario. I will do it. Take it up in tomorrow's class. Okay. Can I declare same method as parent class function? We will come to it. Initialize a variable both in this. Got it. We'll cover it later. Is there problem solving? OOP. Also, as it was other previous topics, or only conceptual? So this is problem solving. It's mostly conceptual only. I get your point. There's no question that I'm going to give you that you're going to solve using OOP principles. But this coding that we are doing, these concepts that we are studying, that is all we are going to take up in OOP. So it's mostly theoretical only, right? But that's what I want you to get clear with. The basic theory of OOP, we just want to get clear with that, right? We don't want to do anything fancy here. Can I declare same method as parent class function? Yes. Initialize a variable in both. Repeat हो रहे हैं यार questions. If I'm not getting how to make notes of all this, I mean we understand right now, but how can we revise efficiently? But one thing that I can do to help you out is I update this document regularly, right? So I told you in the last class also that these codes that you have, these are the codes from the previous batch that I taught, right? So this is also OOP only. This is also something I covered in the lecture, but from their batch. So whatever we discuss in our class also, that also I'm going to. So this I've also added, right? So one is this thing that you can take as a reference. What I can add additionally here is I can also write in one line what were the concepts covered, so that even if you don't have the whole lecture at one place, at least you will know in which order we were working, so that while revising or while studying at a personal level also, you will be clear what flow to follow, what order to follow, right? So that's one thing. Okay, so coming, we are almost over with time, but we can take 2-3 minutes after the time. Okay, so this is one thing. Let me just paste it for you guys. Okay, cool. Right. So what I want to tell you now is, let me just remove these classes. Let me remove all this stuff. Okay, so I'm taking a very basic example here, class A. Okay, and I'm declaring one constructor inside it. It's very simple statement. Right, pretty straightforward. Let me just copy it for future reference. Class B extends A, B, and constructor in class. Right, this is in class A. Right, Control C. Let me repeat this whole thing. This time class C extends class B. Okay, let me have a constructor for class C, and this is constructor inside class C. What kind of inheritance is this one? Let me allow you to chat again. What is the kind of inheritance here? Multi-level, है ना? This is multi-level inheritance. My question to you is, if I do something like this, sorry, C1 is equal to new C. Okay, I am creating an object for class C, which is the you can say childmost class. I mean the bottommost class. My question, I mean, I don't expect an answer from you, but what I want to demonstrate here is the order in which constructors are getting called. Okay, so what I want to tell you is, you have this constructor C. Ideally, from what we understand, honestly speaking, what we will do is, we will just do constructor in class C. I mean, if you ask me before I study OOP, my answer would be, because I've created an object for class C, I would get this statement, constructor in class C. But the point with inheritance is, see, because you inherit all the properties from the parent to the child, before passing on those properties to the child, you need to ready those variables. You need to make those variables ready for inheritance. So that's why in inheritance, the logic is, before you move on, or you can say before you call the constructor for this particular class, what happens is, constructor for the parent is called. Similarly, so basically what I'm saying is, when you will call the constructor of C, or when you will create the object for C, constructor will be called for class B. And by the same logic, for constructor of class B, actually the constructor of A will be called first. So the point that I wanted to explain was order in which constructor calls take place, and the order is top to down. Okay, so the order in which constructor calls take place is top to down. Okay, so if I just run this program without saying anything else, constructor in class A, constructor in class B, constructor in class C. So naturally thinking, this doesn't make any sense, because हमने तो C का object बनाया ना. We only made an object for class C. So what we would have expected was only this line, constructor in class C. So why is there a need to call the constructor for parents also? So that is what I am trying to explain. You, in inheritance, you are passing the variables to the child object, right? You are passing the variables to the child object also. So let's say, what I mean by saying this is, so int A, and inside constructor, let's say, oh sorry, not here, class A na, int a, and inside the constructor what you are doing is a is equal to 5. Very random example, okay, very random example, but the point is, before you hand over the variable a to the child, which will hand over the variable to the child c, you need to get this variable ready. Do you understand this? The need of calling the constructor for parent class, because this is inheritance. There are variables and methods. Methods are not much relevant to this example. There are variables that you need to give proper value to before you pass it on to the child. So do you now get a feeling of why this is happening? And let me give you a better scenario actually. If I comment this out temporarily, and instead of saying C1 is equal to new C, if I do this would be more easy to understand. Okay, so my point is, before we pass on the variable a to class b, we need to assign a proper value to it, or we need to do whatever operation has been designed for it or decided for it, right? So basically we need to get the variables ready before we pass it on to the further child class. That's why when we are talking about inheritance and we create a child class object, what happens is, first the constructor for the parent class is called. Okay, and in this particular case that we had, 3 classes, multi-level inheritance, first the constructor for class B will be called when we are going creating an object for C. But when we are going for the constructor of class B, there something would be happening that would say, okay, because I am talking about creation of an object of class B, I want to make my variables of class A ready. So that's why something happens inside this. I will tell you in the next class, because of which we follow a top down approach. सबसे पहले हम लोग सबसे base class को तैयार करते हैं. We pass on the variables and then we talk about the second class. Because see, the logic is, inside this constructor you can use the variables from class A, right? Inside this variable, inside this constructor, you can use the variables from class A. That is the idea, right? Because B extends A, so B should be able to access variables from A, and it can only do so once proper construction has been done. So the idea is, in inheritance, first the constructor gets called for the parent class, then for the child class, then for the child class, then for the child class. That's how it works. Okay, so that's why the order of calling constructors in Java is in a top-down fashion. Okay, whenever you have inheritance. We will pick up from this point in the next class, and I will ask Lakshay to give us 3 hours for this particular lecture, because 2 hours is not sufficient for you, because we are studying it for the first time. Our strength is also very high. To cover the doubts and to cover the concepts is a little bit challenging, especially for OOP. Once we get to linked list and other DSA concepts, that's again standard, easy concepts, standard time, standard theory. But this is something new and this is something important also. So I will request Lakshay to allow us 3 hours for this. Okay. So having said that, let's 9 to 12 नहीं भाई, थोड़े अपने को भी काम करने पड़ेंगे, right? Real world examples, Ishwar, anything you can take, right? If you have a car, the next level that you can have for it is whether you have a sedan or a hatchback, right? That's what it is called, right? Then you can have a SUV, all that stuff. So these are all examples of inheritance also, and I will give you more examples tomorrow, right? Because we have anyways crossed our time. And thank you guys, those who are wishing Teachers Day. Thank you all. Because of you I am a teacher, right? So sir, we created object for C here. C calls B, B calls A, and A calls A. They should be infinite. A calls A नहीं ना चंदू. For A के ऊपर क्या है? A does not have anything, so it will stop there. That's the thing, right? तीन ज़्यादा हो जाएगा, सेमेस्टर का स्टडी भी करना होता है भाई. You are anyways giving 3 hours here, right? You have a class from 8 to 9, which is in the name of doubt discussion, homework discussion. All I am saying is, till the time we are studying OOP, I can engage those 3 hours instead of the other instructors engaging 1 hour and then me coming for 2 hours. So आपसे 3 घंटे ले रहे हैं ना हम लोग anyways, right? So having said that, let me just stop for today's class. Okay, we'll meet again tomorrow, and I will request Lakshay to share it in advance what we are going to do for the class tomorrow. Okay, so please read these things from beginner's book or GFG or any website that you feel comfortable with, and then come prepared for the class tomorrow. Okay, read inheritance and read polymorphism, at least these two concepts from beginner's book, so that it can become easy for you to understand in tomorrow's class. Okay, cool then. Thank you guys. Okay, bye guys, good night.